So what a pleasure to look out and see all of you here. I want to welcome you to Winnipeg. So thank you for coming and joining us in this conference. So my name is Dr. Jillian Horton, and I am the regional chair of this year's Creating Space 2017 event. Planning it has been a pleasure and a privilege, and it is an event that could not happen without people coming to be here with us to create the energy that makes this event possible. So one thing, in any work that we do that challenges a norm, it's very important to find a community of practice. And one of the most meaningful things for me in taking on the role of organizing this event has been meeting my counterparts across the country. And this work could never have happened without them. So the first people that I want to acknowledge are Alan Peterkin, Pamela Brett McLean, Brett Shrew, and Gilles Leclerc. And Gilles is not here today. But without them, it would not have been possible for us in Winnipeg to take on this event. So to all of you, thank you so much for your leadership and teaching us how to do this. I also want to thank locally, we've had a number of people in our organizing committee who have made this event possible. On the University of Manitoba side, we've had Mr. Jim McLaren, Dr. Sally Longstaff, and my assistant Mackenzie Bentley have all worked very hard to bring you this event, along with a number of others who are acknowledged in our program. In particular, this event could not have unfolded the way that it unfolded without the incredible support of the people I refer to as my angel investors at the Compassion Project. And I will be transitioning this event to them in a few moments to let them tell you about the incredible and beautiful work that they are doing through this vehicle. There are other forces who have made this project possible for us, both financially and in terms of resources. So the University of Manitoba Max Rady College of Medicine has been a generous sponsor. The Department of Internal Medicine at the University of Manitoba provided generous support. The AMS Medical Services provided us with a large operating grant, and we are very grateful for that. And also previous Creating Spaces events have forwarded their funding reserves to us so that we could carry on the tradition of doing this work. So before I move forward, I just want to say a few words about how we chose the theme for this event this year. For those of us who work in medical education, the stories that we have are really the heart of what we have to teach. So our careers are essentially built one patient at a time. And in that sense, it's very easy for us to forget that medicine gives us just as much as we bestow on people by practicing it. So we know that we have that gift, but it's also easy for us to forget to pay due attention to the less desirable effects that the profession can have on us. And to me, this is actually one of the most important mandates of an event like Creating Space. It creates a place and a physical space where we can tell and process the stories that have made us who we are as caregivers and also as people. And it allows us an opportunity to both hear and to be written into a narrative, both as witnesses, bystanders, and participants, and hopefully, ultimately, in some way, healers. So on that note, I would like to call on my friends and colleagues, Dr. Michael McIntyre and Micheline St-Hilaire of the Compassion Project, to introduce our distinguished guest, Dr. Rita Charon.
Merci, Jillian. Alors, bienvenue, welcome everyone. To get us started, we just wanted to acknowledge that we gather here today on original lands of the Anishinaabe, Cree, Ojibwe, Dakota, and Dene peoples and the homeland of the Métis Nation. And we recognize the treaties that were made on these territories and acknowledge the harms and mistakes of the past. And we hope that these efforts towards a more loving and compassionate world will contribute to the spirit of reconciliation and collaboration. And so on behalf of the Compassion Project, We want to welcome you to the heart of the continent because from my understanding, we're actually welcoming people from both near and far. Alors, notre partenariat avec Creating Space 7 a vraiment su lancer cette visite avec la docteure Rita Charon. Et nous en sommes reconnaissants parce que le projet Compassion de la Corporation catholique de la santé du Manitoba, c'est vraiment un effort d'appuyer le bien-être des cliniciens et de voir à rehausser leur capacité de compassion pour soi et aussi ensuite pour les autres. Alors, notre intérêt dans la médecine narrative découle de notre désir de co-créer ensemble les conditions qui mènent à cet esprit de compassion. Alors, Mike.
Our partnership with Creating Space to enable Dr. Charon's visit is a relationship that we hold dear. The Compassion Project, a strategic initiative of the Catholic Health Corporation of Manitoba, is an attempt to support the well-being of those in healthcare and to make it possible for clinicians to be compassionate to themselves and to others. Our interest in narrative medicine derives from our desire to co-create the conditions for compassion to flourish. It is an honor and privilege to have such a distinguished guest. Rita Charon is a general internist and literary scholar who originated the field of narrative medicine. She is the founder and executive director of the program in narrative medicine and professor of medicine at Columbia University. She completed the MD at Harvard in 1978 and the PhD in English at Columbia, concentrating on the works of Henry James. Her research investigates narrative medicine training, reflective practice, and healthcare team effectiveness, and has been sponsored by the NIH, the NEH, the Josiah Macy Jr. Foundation, and several other private foundations. She lectures and teaches internationally on narrative medicine and is widely published in leading medical and literary journals. She has been awarded a Guggenheim Fellowship, a Bellagio residence from the Rockefeller Foundation, and many distinctions from clinical and literary societies. She is the author of Narrative Medicine, Honoring the Stories of Illness, and co-author of Principles and Practice of Narrative Medicine, and many other noted works. I've had the privilege of attending the program that Rita heads at Columbia, the short seminar, and no, we're in for a wonderful afternoon. Rita, welcome, bienvenue.
Thank you very much. Okay. Thanks so much. Thanks so much for letting me join you. Merci beaucoup pour le bienvenue. I've been looking forward to being here with this group. I have not been to one of the 6 or 7 that have come already. 7. Although many of my students have come and they keep coming back and they say, Rita, you gotta go. So I know the kind of foundational work that goes on here. I know the commitment that those of you who are here demonstrate to bringing the arts, humanities, and social sciences into clinical education. And what I want to engage you in thinking, let's see, can I move this around? Yeah. What I want us to think about is not so much that we do it, because we've all been doing this for a while now, but rather really why we do it and what at this point in the maturity of this field, what it's for. And at the beginning of this work, I mean, I've been at this since the early 80s, the 70s. And at the beginning, we kind of had to make a case, you know? Oh, the study of literature will help students to tolerate ambiguity. Well, yeah, it does that. Or the study of humanities has something to do, various people claimed, to do with empathy. Well, we think that's the case. But let's start thinking even more fundamentally about how can we articulate why the work we do is necessary in the sciences, which is indeed what clinical medicine is. What I'm gonna kind of think with you about is what is underneath the distinction between the arts and the sciences. Because until we know that, we will be marginal cranks within the edifice of clinical medicine and medical science. That's a harsh way to put it. We all used to be marginal cranks years ago. By now, we do have more stature. We are required in many of the schools and their curricula. We have, I think, made a tremendous case for the things we're able to bring to clinical medicine, to patients, to caregivers, on an array of realms, whether it's care of the chronically ill, bereavement work, trauma witnessing, trauma therapy, a whole separate branch called narrative therapy. Many of the things that you all are involved in and that I will join you in learning about tomorrow. You know, I start my thinking with C.P. Snow's Two Cultures, 1959, when C.P. Snow, who was both a chemist and a novelist, wrote a scathing critique of the humanities. This was in Britain, saying that those within the humanities had derided and dismissed and ignored science only because they weren't smart enough to understand it. And it's about time English professors and sociologists and historians, it's about time that you start to pay attention to science, because if you don't, you will be left behind. And this kind of, and he very clearly made the distinction. Science is, and you can imagine what he said, the kind of truth-discovering and reliable and evidence-based forms of thought, and that the humanities were soft. Do you see? And that distinction, of course, has held. And how many of your students say, oh, that's soft? Do they still say that? Huh? Or even fuzzy? Yeah. So we have to get under the distinction. And I'm talking vastly. This is where we are. Can we put the lights down a little? Yeah, you see that better? Okay, that's Jupiter. It was a picture taken on April 15th, like 10 days ago or 12 days ago, through the Hubble. This is 415 million miles away. And the red spot that you see, it's called the Great Red Spot. It's actually a storm on the surface of Jupiter. It's about the size of the Earth. You got it? So we're talking at that level, guys. We're talking all the way up. We're talking cosmic, all right? As we kind of look down and see where in this universe, where in this, at least, solar system, are we? As we're doing this work in arts, humanities, and social sciences now, do I say medical education or do I say clinical education for this room? I hope, are there nursing educators and PT, physical therapy and social work, psychology? Yes, good, good. So, the other cosmic thought I want us to carry is this. The unities, if we're looking under the distinction between the arts and the sciences, we're looking for the unities. The unities between arts and sciences can best and perhaps only be discovered in a healthcare center, in a healthcare setting, because of our scorching nearness to the problem of time. All right? This helps me to think why the work we're doing is so important. That there are things that we come to know about time and about mortality and about the temporary matter of life. We come to know this because of our day in, day out exposure. And I believe that this allows us to see things that others cannot see, that expose the unities between the arts and the sciences. Is it dark enough for you to see this? Yeah? This is Rothko, Mark Rothko. It's called Blue, Green, Brown, 1952. It's an abstract painting. It's not a painting about anything. You don't know, you can't tell, or you can't agree on what it means. It commands absorption and attention. I hope I'm not going to keep it up on the screen for very long. I got more pictures to show you, but even just looking at it briefly, the colors are saturated. The bars, he calls them bars of color, are buoyant. They're balanced. They're floating. Well, when I gaze at this, and I know this painting very well. I had to track down who owned it because I was determined to get permission to reprint this painting on a book we recently published. So I know the people who own it. I haven't yet visited it, but I've spent a lot of time appreciating the depth of the balance of this work. But you don't know where it takes you. You don't know, you wonder, what is the nature of the creativity that results in such a work? There is doubt in this work, simply the doubt of what it might represent for the maker, for those who behold it for yourself. There's a balance between that doubt and the precision of the work. It's not haphazard. And what we see, I think we can begin to agree that what we see is horizon atop horizon. From the bottom of these rectangles up, and even in the upper fields, in the blue upper fields, there's a sense of a horizon even in the darker part of that blue. This is a more obvious horizon. Van Gogh painted this in the year of his death, 1890. It's called Wheat Fields Under Thunderclouds. And what Van Gogh did here was to find a way that no one had found before to represent the flow of that wheat field, the organic movement, the flow, the life of that wheat field, even with the human figure over to the right. And then somehow the sky responds to the flow of that wheat field with a flow of its own. And This was 1890. Since then, the rest of us are able to see the sky in this way, and to see wheat fields in this way, that he has given us, through his eye, has given us a way to view the land. This is Richard Diebenkorn, another abstract expressionist. This painting is part of a series of about 80 works called Ocean Park. And that's the neighborhood in Santa Monica on the coast in California where he lived. Now, this is not a painting of the sea and the sky, although he lived at the beach. It's a painting of light. It's a capture of color. And in this series of 80, you see just a richness of color, of light, of ways in which one color can donate itself to the other. So it's not a horizon as you'd see at the ocean. It's rather a horizon of the eye of that painter. But this one is a horizon that you'd see at the beach. This is Whistler, sea and rain. And what do we see? We see blue sky. We see rather turbulent looking sea. We see a stretch of beach, and then more water, and then beach again. And unlike the Diebenkorn, we see here a figure. And the figure, I don't know if you can, yeah, you can see it in this light. The figure's sort of translucent. Do you see that? Like you can kind of see through him. So the question is, did Whistler decide at the last minute to throw in a human figure and then maybe start taking it away? Is there, does it really belong there? Is it really part of the painting, or is it an afterthought? So you can think that, and then at the same time, you can think, look at that. All that sky, all that sea, all that beach for the one guy. And those two opposing thoughts resonate in your mind. It's a paradox, isn't it? Either it's all for the one guy, or the one guy is kind of incidental. And it's a paradox. And your mind is able to capture that paradox. I couldn't have put that in a paragraph. I mean, I just told it to you, but you had to be looking at the painting, right? In order to capture that paradox. Hans Gadamer, the philosopher who really developed the field of hermeneutics, writes in Truth and Method of our individual horizons. He says, to acquire a horizon means that one learns to look beyond what is close at hand, not in order to look away from it, but to see it better. All right? So the idea of the horizon is not that it limits what you see, but that it stakes out a far, so that you know that there's something beyond it. All right? And then he says, Gadamer, when we read the works of others, when we view the art of others, when we relate to another, we can undergo a fusion of horizons. Fusion of horizons, enlarging our own limited view, but still maintaining an awareness of our original perspective. So he says the horizon is, quote, something into which we move and that moves with us. All right? It's not static. It's growing. It's organic. It develops as we develop. It becomes indeed our own view, our own perspective. Now, if there are historians in the house or 18th century scholars, you know about the Age of Wonder. end of the 18th century, the Age of Wonder in London. This was the Royal Society of London, where arts and sciences joined horizons. So in this one large society were the Romantic poets, Wordsworth, Keats, Coleridge, Shelley, Fanny Burney, all of the major Romantic poets were there, along with the astronomers, William and Caroline Herschel, John Dalton, the person who, I have to choose a verb, dreamed up atomic theory, right? Humphrey Davy, the chemist who isolated potassium, sodium, calcium, and magnesium. And this was not incidentally like social gatherings. This was serious work. William Herschel and his sister Caroline discovered the planet Uranus. They discovered a new planet. It was within years of Wordsworth publishing lyrical ballads. And Wordsworth and Herschel worked together on Herschel's developing ideas about the universe. Herschel, in fact, came up with an anti-Newtonian theory of the universe. Describing Newton's theory was, Newton developed the theory of a stable, symmetrical, knowable universe. And Herschel's universe was one filled with dark spaces, never ending, always changing. And he was able to develop that in part because of his work with Wordsworth, the poet, who could help him find the language to describe what he had in mind. Do you see? And what we think of today as the universe is much closer to Herschel's than it is to Newton's. But I just want to put in your mind that this unity existed at one point. It's not that long ago. And they called it, and we call it now, the Age of Wonder. This is neither Jupiter nor Uranus. It is an embryoid body, which is a collection of a few embryonic stem cells. This is from the Precision Medicine Initiative at Columbia, Tom Manianis's lab. And it shows the cellular diversity that occurs in embryonic neurogenesis as the nervous system is developing at the very, very, very beginnings of life, that all the different colors represent different kinds of neural tissue that's developing. These are aging stem cells. These are hematopoietic stem cells in the aging host. This is from the lab of Emmanuelle Passaguet, also at Columbia. She runs the Columbia Stem Cell Initiative. And she has found, she studied the circulating stem cells of old people and has found dramatic differences in the vitality of these stem cells. That some of them are able to self-renew, to repair themselves, to clear the cell of debris through autophagy, which is kind of the eating up of debris within the cell, and others can't. And she and her group have found some possible mechanisms that may turn on this autophagy for those cells that have lost it. Do you see? So, I mean, and this is a, you know, NIH-sponsored lab at Columbia, but they are searching for permanent youth. Do you see? So, why am I showing you these after these paintings? What horizons are fused here? What are Rothko and Whistler and my bioscientists all doing? They are creative scientists and creative artists braving doubt toward discovery. Right? I didn't tell you about Tom Manianis. As he's studying the neurodiversity and realizing all of the different cell types and cell functions that arise in the embryo, he is studying as his instance neurodegenerative diseases, especially ALS, amyotrophic lateral sclerosis. So that he is in his lab, which is vast, applying what they're beginning to know in the lab toward clinical problems. ALS, or Lou Gehrig's disease, is what we, I guess, call it in the States. But this catastrophic neurodegenerative disease. So all that I've shown you so far, the Rothko, the Whistler, the labs, show the pinnacle of creativity. I'm sure each of you could come up with a definition of creativity. I'm sure of it. It's what you do. It's why you're here. But as a starter, what is creativity? It's a cognitive, imaginative, aesthetic, affective, or emotional state that leads to fresh vision, originality, and discovery. It's what we know as originality, of seeing something that no one's ever seen. And we even know a little bit about what happens within the brain to allow this. I mean, I'm at Columbia with Eric Kandel, who's done so much of this work. And we know that the things that are recruited within the creative brain, that so many parts of the brain are recruited within creative work, that it emphasizes mind freedom, the connections between consciousness and the unconscious, contemplative capacities, emotion, and personal engagement with the work of its subject. That as they study creative people at work, they see that all of these networks, the network for executive attention, the work for salience, for language, for memory, for social cognition, are all put into play as we, as creative persons, as our artists and our scientists, as creative persons, are giving ourselves the exhilarating freedom to see, to imagine that which hasn't been imagined or seen before. Now, I put creativity with doubt. Don't ask me where the idea came from, but the one seems to need the other. And by doubt, I mean the radical unknowingness of unmooring uncertainty and wholesale indeterminacy. That the doubt is not knowing what belongs with what, being in the unformed, chaotic state prior to form in order to discover form. This is radical doubt. It's way below the conventional skepticism of any scientist, any reader, any writer. It's when it occurs when the doubter leaves the shelter of the known to enter unmapped areas of the unknown. This is both terrifying and exhilarating. Terrifying and exhilarating. We know that art begins in radical doubt. When Beethoven and Van Gogh and Henry James brave the doubt, they don't know where they're heading. The late quartets, Starry Night, Wings of the Dove, as their products, expose the peril of the journey from chaos to form. The form they create requires precision. These forms are not haphazard. I said that once already. I'm saying it again, because so many of the critiques that we get of our work in the humanities, within the sciences, oh, well, he threw it together, didn't he? You know, anybody can write. I can write. Threw it together. No, they require precision. The sonnet, the minuet, the elegy, the obituary, the long, deep, unfolding Jamesian sentence, the discharge summary. These are forms that require and rely on tradition and innovation, recognition and surprise. They're forms in which nothing is lost, nothing is wasted, every word counts, all is accounted for. Think of a Bach partita. The precision of the 64th notes there, the 30 seconds there, when it becomes a triplet, when all of a sudden there are too many notes in a measure and you say, it's contrapuntal. There are two voices here. Extraordinary precision. These works are showing to the maker and the beholder what has been revealed. And the spectator, the listener, the reader, fuse their horizons with the creators. And it's within that fusion of horizons that the meaning of the work can emerge. Now, I hope those of you who are clinicians or who teach clinicians are also listening to me thinking of clinician and patient, fusing of horizons. Yes? Fusing of horizons. All right. Now, these entwined forces of creativity and doubt are as pivotal in the sciences as they are in the arts. And again, I'm not talking about the typical kind of absence of certainty, the skepticism toward one's own findings that is expected of anyone doing science, challenging the findings of others, committing yourself to some means of assessing the reliability, the validity, at least the truth potential of your hypothesis, the trustworthiness of your findings. All of this is routine, but there are some scientists with unmooring doubt, with doubt that goes deeply below that level of skepticism. Thomas Kuhn called them those who shift paradigms in Structure, Scientific Revolution. Again, so long ago, but still very relevant. It's those scientists and artists who can challenge the reigning frameworks. Remember, we started at Jupiter, who can really challenge that which governs other thought, who can observe and recognize emergent new concepts, whose work is unprecedented, open-ended, and who can withstand resistance from tradition. These are the ones able of doing creative work. Kuhn says they have learned to see nature in a different way. All right? So whether we're talking about Van Gogh, Beethoven, and Henry James, or the paradigm-shifting scientists, we're talking about this resonating connection, that creativity occurs when the creative person can tolerate doubt, and to tolerate doubt requires creativity. It's a Mobius strip, kind of. Another way to say it is, to tolerate doubt both requires and generates creativity. All right? So that we get to a point that we start to understand a little bit about where truth might come from. Heidegger says, art lets truth originate and conceives of the creation of a work, and I'm going to include the sciences in that, as bringing forth not only matter and form, but also knowledge. So this is one of the places that I land as I'm thinking about what is underneath the distinction between us, is this unmooring doubt that takes great bravery to tolerate. All right? The distinction between the arts and the sciences might be replaced by the distinction between those scientists and artists who can tolerate doubt and those who try to banish it. Okay? Do you see? And so, remembering that the doubt is both terrifying and exhilarating, what we're hoping to find are ways to enable our artists and our scientists to go ahead, go into that unmooring doubt, and then, and maybe only then, you will see what is remaining to be seen. All right? Don't worry about leaving behind, now I say this as an American, the NIH grant renewal cycles, which are part of the mechanisms that tamp down doubt. Do you see? Because you need your pilot data, you got to know what you're doing in the renewal 5 years before you do the renewal. You know that. So this is really a challenge to the work in science as we know it, and the parallel in art, of course, is the difference between a safe project and a not safe project. What's going to get picked up in the New Yorker and what's not going to get picked up in the New Yorker. What's going to get a Guggenheim and what won't get a Guggenheim. We know this. So what I'm talking about has layers of courage as well as the commitment to see beyond that horizon. All right, I'm talking about space, or I have been talking about space, the horizon, the boundaries between fields. I want to switch now to time, because that is what I think we, by virtue of the work we do, come to comprehend in ways that others perhaps cannot. This is Hasegawa Tohaku, a Japanese painter. This is a screen. It was painted in 1580. It's about 5 feet by 12 feet. This is the right panel. So the pine tree in Japan is the symbol for youth, vitality, sometimes masculinity, sometimes military strength. At New Year's, they use pine branches to adorn their homes. So, is it dark enough for you to see? What do you see here? What do you see? Somebody up front, what do you see?
I see forest.
A forest, yes. Are they, is it youth and vitality? Some of them, right? Right. So there's some upward ones in the front anyway, and then there's some falling. What about the ones like further in the background? Yeah, and they're just simply harder to see. They're in a mist. They're in a fog. They're far away. Some of them look kind of ghostly to me. Yeah. I showed this to a group of Japanese clinicians in Tokyo last summer, and one said rather rapidly, and it was kind of affirmed by the group. Well, he says, it's one pine tree, but at different stages of its life, which stunned me. And the more I thought of it, the more profound it became. Here's the left panel, which is similar, ghostly again. Even more ghostly, I think, because that whole middle part is quite whited out. And then up in the upper right, we see the mountain. Do you see that? Do you see it? So that we're placing now, if it's one pine tree in its entire life, or the pine forest, we're placing it more on the cosmos. But the idea that this work, that this screen represents the existence of the pine tree, including its ghosts, appeals to me. Literary scholar George Lukács writes in his Theory of the Novel, "We might almost say that the entire inner action of the novel is nothing but a struggle against the power of time." Do you see that? Do you understand? That we would not need the novel if it weren't for the fact that we die. That we need our art in order to help us understand the passage and the trouble of time, the problem of time. Bertrand Russell says, physics and psychology enable us to conceptualize those immediate experiences upon which our knowledge of time is based. And if you think about both literary works and visual art works, from Homer to Shakespeare to James, including Woolf and Joyce and Proust and Beckett and Borges, they're laboratories for a linguistic depiction of time's paradoxes. We just keep trying over and over to find ways to grapple with time's passing. And certainly in visual arts too, from Impressionism to Cubism to Dadaism to Surrealism and even to graphic novels, that were depicting almost so as to tolerate our mortality, the being in time. And I would argue that Manianis and Passaguet do likewise. Because what are these if not the struggle against the power of time? She's looking for ways to rejuvenate the aging stem cell, which means to rejuvenate the home of those aging stem cells. Human biology is, like Lukács's novel, a challenge to the dominance of time, to its last word. It's to take up the struggle not only against time, but literally against death. I mean, why do we do it feels almost foolish to say it. What is biomedicine but an effort to answer time, answer mortality, postpone death and illness? If it weren't that, we wouldn't kind of need to bother. Now, granted, there are forms of suffering that are not imminent death, but certainly when we look at much of the work that goes on, it is in an effort to elongate our time in life. Certainly those of us, the scientists who are working in the aging brain and cognitive decline and dementia studies, they're learning about time and memory, about erasure of time, about alternative arrows of time. A gray, stooped, frail-looking man, thin chest, sits alone on the A train. Sparse beard, rumpled plaid shirt, worn khaki pants. He's reading a glossy covered issue of Life Extension. He wants to live forever. I mean, I'm on the subway looking at this guy and I'm saying, he wants to live forever, as maybe do we all. This is the Doanji Rock Garden in Kyoto. It was created in 1499. It's about 30 feet by 80 feet. There are 15 rocks in the rock garden. There is no place on the perimeter of the garden from which you can see all 15 rocks. You can see that some of them are upstanding, some of them are very close to the surface of the garden. It's very highly reflective white gravel. And we have kind of islands that are isolated from one another. There's no bridging between these islands. And yet they're contained within this one work. And there is a overall magnetic unity to the work. We who live in places like health centers, medical centers, hospitals, nursing homes, we are the ones closest to these mysteries. For this closeness, we suffer. We live around illness and death. We cannot help it, for we chose it. I get on a Presbyterian hospital elevator. A young man dressed in a barn jacket gets on the elevator, pushing a little wheelchair with a bald girl, maybe around 10 years old. They get off at 2. I know they're heading to the MR suite or the PET scanner to see what more ravages her osteosarcoma has cost her, or maybe some regression of the disease. We see this. We know this. I'm sure this happens to many of you. And then I get off at the 9th floor and I work on the revision of a manuscript, or I have a meeting with my administrator. This is part of life. If I worked at Goldman Sachs or Google, I would not be faced with day in, day out evidence of the power of mortality. But this is why we're here, because this is what we know. And to the extent that the arts can help us understand it, the arts belong in our life because of our need to give me some verbs: face, accept, not be quite so bewildered, not be quite so frightened, live around the problem of time. The best description of mortality that I've come across is from John Banville. He's a novelist. He wrote The Sea, which is a magnificent novel, Irish, contemporary. And he has a novel called The Infinities, in which he has Zeus, the head of the gods, talking to his fellow gods up on Mount Olympus, right? They're all up there on Mount Olympus, and they're kind of looking down at us, at the mortals who are assembled. And they're kind of laughing at us because the humans, the mortals, are always getting into trouble, and the gods have to go down and help them. So they're kind of making fun of us hapless mortals. And Zeus says to the others that he envies us our mortality. And he says something like this. He says, "This is the mortal world. It is a world where nothing is lost, where all is accounted for, while yet the mystery of things is preserved. A place where they may live, however briefly, however tenuously, in the failing evenings of the self, solitary and at the same time together, somehow, here in this place, dying as they may be, and yet fixed forever in a luminous, unending instant." Do you see? So we're now in a luminous, unending instant, right now. This, whatever we are, 100 people, 150 people, it is in our instant unending. And yet we know that this life is a temporary matter. And maybe we're even able to embrace its temporary nature so as to make it matter. I think that's what Zeus meant. It makes it matter. We, though, the clinicians, come to know what patients pay for with their own lives. What they pay for is the knowledge of what happens when you die, or the realization that life is temporary. But it almost feels unfair, it seems unfair, that we come to know this too without having to sacrifice our life, because we see intimately others going through it. I hope all of you have a chance in your practice to talk with patients facing life-threatening illness. Do we gather from them what the actual experience of this looming end of life means? I think of all of us, I think it's bedside nurses, physical therapists, the students on our services, maybe the interns, who really come to understand what this experience is, because they're in those rooms in the hospital all day, not just coming in, doing rounds, writing orders, going away. They're in the rooms in the hospital all day, walking the halls with the patient, helping that patient relearn the speech they've lost with their stroke. They meet the eyes of family. They sit in those rooms facing outdoors, facing the living world, facing that setting sun. Those wordless minutes when patients and their families realize that the illness has come or the dying has begun and that it will never end. So you know, I brought you from horizons and space to eternity and temporality and mortality and time, in the effort to say that which we must know within healthcare is something that we can gain from our art, from our humanities. I think for us that's what they're for. And also in this grander scheme, these are the things that unite us with those who seem so different from us. You know, I mean, if we caricature the artist and the scientist, we're still like C.P. Snow. They do the objective and the universal and the quantitative, and we do the singular and the interpretive. But indeed, if we think of our work as united through this kind of doubt-tolerating creativity, then we can remember that in fact we do it all. That what separates us is much smaller than what unites us, because the artist and the scientist are similarly together asking questions about how we know what we know. What is the uncertainty? What are the limits of this doubt? What are the limits of the imagination? How can we equip ourselves to see these things that have never been seen before? That's what unites us. This terrifying, exhilarating, radical creativity and doubt that enables us to persist in the face of time. Let me end with a series of paintings that says it better than I can. These are paintings by Ferdinand Hodler, a Swiss portraitist and landscape artist. Soon after the birth of their daughter, his lover, Valentine Godet-Darel, sickened and died quickly of ovarian cancer. She was young. She was like in her early 30s. And he was with her through her whole illness. I mean, it was, I think, a couple of months. And he, as a painter, did what he could to see her through. He painted her at different stages in her illness so as to donate his own skill and gift to being able to see her as clearly as she could be seen. The youth, the illness, the exhaustion, the pain, the ordeal, the last painting. And sunset over Lake Geneva. Thank you.